But what you gonna do when you sitting at the head of the table? Once you there, you got to hold it down.
Sound like one of them good problems.
Yeah. Prison and graveyards, full of boys who wore the crown.
Point is, they wore it. It's my turn to wear it now.
Marlo Stanfield is arguably the coldest, most ruthless character across all 5 seasons of The Wire, which is certainly saying something considering the show featured vile and repugnant characters across all the different aspects of the city of Baltimore portrayed in the show, including the drug trade, police, politicians, lawyers, and more. So he certainly made his mark. The key antagonist of seasons 4 and 5, we are first introduced to Marlo in season 3. Before we go any further here, let's state the obvious: spoilers. In case the video's title wasn't obvious enough, we are going to be looking at Marlo's storyline all the way to its ultimate conclusion, which takes place in the series finale, and we will obviously touch on plenty of key characters, plot points, and deaths. So if you haven't finished all of The Wire yet,
get out of here. Just get the fuck out of here, man.
Now that that's out of the way, let's get to it. As mentioned in the intro, Marlo is definitely one of the coldest characters in The Wire, and certainly a character that was easy to hate, as he is responsible for the ultimate end of some of the more beloved characters on the show, either directly on his orders, as in the cases of Butchie, Prop Joe, and Bodie, or indirectly, as with Omar, who he draws out of retirement. And while these characters certainly qualify as being in the game,
All in the game.
the murders of unnamed characters such as the store security guard or the delivery lady on Marlo's orders certainly drive home his cruelty and complete lack of feeling for anything other than his pursuit of the crown. Given the raw emotion that Marlo's actions could bring out of fans and viewers, and the fact that he is one of, if not the, central figure of the drug trade and the corresponding storylines throughout the show's final 2 seasons, it was an interesting decision by the show to not give us a clean, tidy ending to Marlo's storyline, instead leaving Marlo's ultimate fate unanswered. Marlo standing where he first started, on a street corner.
You all think you looking at? You, nigga. Do you know who I am?
Nigga, you know who I am?
Some fans have expressed disappointment that a character responsible for the death and suffering of so many did not meet a more satisfying ending himself, either in prison or in the grave. However, what we're going to discuss and analyze in this video today is the possibility, whether intentional by the show or not, that the show did give us a clear ending for Marlo. While it's not portrayed on the screen, I believe there is enough evidence and clues given to us to discern what ultimately happens to Marlo, or at least what possible fate of his is far and away the most likely. Before we dig into the final fate of Marlo, let's recap his run in The Wire that led to him standing on that corner in the final shot we see of him. We're first introduced to Marlo in season 3, when the Barksdale organization is still the top crew in the drug trade and running the show in West Baltimore. At the start of season 3, Stringer Bell has already founded, along with Prop Joe, the New Day Co-op, allowing the dealers of Baltimore to grow richer than ever before by working together to get the best package through Prop Joe's connection with the Greeks, and mostly avoiding the typical violence associated with the drug trade, save for a pesky nephew or two. Stringer's focus on the business side of things, while limiting the violence and making the organization richer than ever before, does open the door for someone like Marlo, which is alluded to by Slim Charles in one of Stringer's meetings with his lieutenants.
Slim Charles.
Shit, our people got to stand somewhere, don't it? I mean, all the product in the world don't mean nothing if you constantly getting your ass whipped for standing on another fool's corner.
Marlo, thanks to his best-in-class muscle, Chris and Snoop, starts to expand his territory and is mostly unchecked by the Barksdales, save for one easily dealt with incursion by Bodie and his crew, which ends with an ass whooping. He also turns down Stringer's attempts to bring Marlo into the co-op. Given Stringer's instinct to avoid violence in the name of business, it appears Marlo is going to be allowed to expand unchecked. But then Avon comes home from prison. Avon, built much more in the same vein as Marlo and Stringer, immediately recognizes the danger in allowing Marlo to move and expand into their territory without repercussions. Avon refuses to acquiesce to the co-op's new way of thinking, and Marlo refuses to give ground to the newly returned West Side King. And thus, the Barksdale-Stanfield War is born, which forms the central plot of the drug storyline for Season 3, along with Stringer and Avon's falling out. The war drags on with casualties on both sides, and after initial defeats, Avon quickly regroups and retools, using his vast resources and connections, and late in the season it appears that Avon may deal Marlo the final blow. However, thanks to some assists from Omar and Brother Mazzone, and finally the Baltimore Police Department, Marlo prevails, not really defeating Avon himself, but certainly outlasting him. Avon's return to prison, along with the majority of the Barksdale crew, means Marlo is the new king of West Baltimore. This is where things pick up in Season 4, with Marlo consolidating his power in West Baltimore the only way he knows how, through intimidation and murder, and continuing to reject all attempts from the co-op, now led by Prop Joe, to bring him in. Eventually, a scheming Prop Joe is able to set Omar on a card game frequented by Marlo, and after letting Marlo know he knew the game would be robbed ahead of time, and showing Marlo the advantages he would find through the co-op, he finally manages to bring Marlo in. Marlo helps the co-op run off the New York crews trying to butt into East Baltimore, and his new connection to the co-op's superior dope allows him to gain even more wealth and power. However, Omar's robbery of the co-op shipment, later on in the season, drives a wedge of sorts between Joe and Marlo, although Joe doesn't know it yet, as well as making Omar an even bigger target for Marlo. Eventually, at the end of Season 4, the cops grow wise to Marlo's method of hiding his crew's murder victims in the city's vacant houses, thanks to Lester. And this is where Season 4 ends, with the ultimate showdown set up for Season 5, the show's final season. The reinvigorated Major Crimes Unit, with everyone's favorite drunken Irish self-destructive mess of a goddamn good detective back on the team.
The fuck did I do?
Versus Marlo and his crew, as well as Marlo and his crew versus Omar, once they run his ass back out of retirement in Season 5. Poor Butchie. This being Baltimore, however, the PD versus Marlo showdown fizzles out early in Season 5, thanks to deep budgetary cuts to the police department, based on Mayor Carcetti's focus on his own future political ambitions over the well-being of the city he's currently supposed to be leading. It takes a Jimmy McNulty in full fuck it mode, with help from Lester, to keep any type of police presence on Marlo and his crew, albeit through some pretty bizarre methods.
Oh, Jesus Christ, you sick fuck. Oh.
On the Omar versus Marlo front, it shares some similarities to the outcome of the Barksdale versus Marlo war, with both sides suffering casualties, only for Marlo to receive an assist from a third party, this time from a 9-year-old boy. Yeah, The Wire was a dark show. So once again, while not ultimately defeating his main foe himself, Marlo does outlast him. As for the co-op in Season 5, Marlo finally finds a way to move around Prop Joe and get direct contact with the Greeks. And with this completed, he offs Joe, to achieve what he's wanted from the introduction of his character on the show, the Crown. With Joe gone, Marlo essentially dismantles the co-op in everything but name only, installing himself as dictator. With the crown firmly on his head and his last nemesis Omar gone, it appears Marlo is set up to rule with an iron fist over Baltimore's drug trade, until Jimmy and Lester finally break through in their secret investigation of Marlo. Marlo and his crew end up in cuffs, and it appears Marlo's fate will be the inside of a jail cell after all, when another crazy assist comes Marlo's way, this time from Herc. Herc, who ironically is the one who was responsible for Lester getting Marlo's number in the first place, lets Marlo's attorney Maurice Levy, who has employed Herc as a PI, know that this case screams wiretap. And from there, it doesn't take long for Levy to discern that an illegal wiretap is at play. Although Perlman has dirt of her own on Levy, it's not enough for her to keep Marlo behind bars, and they ultimately strike a deal that allows Marlo to walk, on one condition. Marlo has to leave the drug trade behind, or else Perlman makes it clear that once a political hit is more stomachable by City Hall, they will take Marlo down, even if it means Jimmy and Lester go down with him. So Marlo retires, selling his Greek Connect to the co-op for $10 million and leaving the drug trade behind. Marlo has seemingly won the game. He's filthy rich, he's attending high-powered business networking events with Maurice Levy, and he doesn't have to worry about prosecution so long as he stays out of the drug game. But it's simply not in Marlo's nature. He leaves the suits in the beautiful high-rise building to head down to where he's most comfortable, a violent, run-down street corner, where he assaults 2 young corner boys, smiling to himself afterward while he tastes his own blood. And then, that's it. That's where his story ends as far as what we see on screen. Fans were split on Marlo's ending, many applauding the show for staying true to its core and not giving us some Hollywood ending like a cliche shootout between Marlo and Omar, or Marlo and the police in the streets, or the final shot being the jail cell closing on Marlo. Other fans were disappointed that Marlo didn't get his comeuppance, given how ruthless and evil he had been throughout the show's run. Regardless of how fans felt, it was certainly a bold move by the show to leave Marlo's ending up in the air. But did the show really leave his ultimate fate up in the air? That's what we're going to discuss today. While the last shot we see of Marlo is him standing on that street corner, plotting his next move, and therefore we obviously aren't given a glimpse of Marlo's ultimate fate, I believe there are enough clues left at the end of Season 5, as well as a logical look at the remaining players in the drug game and Marlo's position to ultimately determine what happens to Marlo. Just because we don't see it on screen, I do believe Marlo's story has a clear, definitive ending. So with that in mind, let's start by breaking down the 4 possibilities for Marlo's story beyond what we see on screen, one of which is, to me, clearly the one that wraps up Marlo's story. The first possible continuation of Marlo's story is one I'll only touch on briefly, as it is technically possible, but in my opinion, it would be so against Marlo's character and nature that it sounds utterly ridiculous. However, like Marlo, I'm not one for loose ends, so we'll cover all our bases here. Try not to laugh, but in an infinite universe theory, there is a universe where Marlo walks back into the room with Levy and the other suited up businessmen and continues with his planned retirement, staying on his new path as a straight businessman. The corner scuffle with those 2 young men? Nothing more than one last adrenaline rush Marlo needed to get out of his system, one last homage of sorts to his old way of life. As he stands on that corner, he comes to his senses, reflects on what he built as the drug lord of Baltimore for a very brief run, and then continues on to his new life. Yeah, I'm not buying it, and I doubt you are either. The last look of Marlo, tasting his own blood on the corner, that smile, that little yeah he gives, can only be described as the look of a man in his own element. From day one, Marlo has only been obsessed with the throne. The idea of Marlo leaving all that behind to pursue the life of a normal businessman just doesn't seem plausible. Marlo is not Stringer. This was Stringer's dream, not Marlo's. Marlo is built more like Avon, except even compared to Avon, he's less of a businessman and more of a pure gangster. Think back on one of Avon's famous lines.
Yeah, I ain't no suit-wearing businessman like you. You know, I'm just a gangster, I suppose. And I want my corners.
Marlo is an even more exaggerated version of that. I simply refuse to believe Marlo could exist in the legitimate business world without going insane. He's built for the streets, he's made for the streets, his name ringing out in a street corner is all he cares about.
My name is my name.
It's clear in his final scene, he realizes this and plans to go all in again on the drug game. There is no doubt that Marlo is in a very weak position as far as the drug trade goes at the end. Marlo's greatest strength by far was always the fact that he had the best muscle in the show. While the early Barksdales could have given Marlo problems with their trio of Weebay, Bird, and Stinkum, by season 3, Weebay and Bird are serving life sentences, and as for Stinkum...
Hey now.
Slim and a ragtag group of hitters purchased by Avon behind him were able to hold their own, but once the Barksdales disbanded and Slim moved into more of a business role with Prop Joe, Chris and Snoop were essentially left unchecked. This allowed Marlo to grow his power at will, as there was no other crew in the show that could compete on the muscle front. However, at the point Marlo is suited up standing on a corner, Chris and Snoop are out of the picture, Chris serving his own life sentence alongside Weebay, and Snoop having been dropped by Michael, another Marlo hitter he's now without. His last muscle left of note is O-Dog, who, outside of dropping Bodie, has one pretty feeble drive-by attempt to his name, and that's about it. To make matters worse for Marlo, his top drug lieutenants are also out of the picture. Monk is serving a long sentence, and she's... So we know that Marlo's crew is left in shambles, practically non-existent. What about the Greeks? Well, more bad news for Marlo on that front. He's already sold the Greek connection to the co-op at this point, as seen by the fact that Slim Charles and Fatface Rick are meeting with Vontas, with the Greek in his customary position listening in. That, after all, was the whole point of Marlo's going legit. He had the 10 mil from the co-op to purchase the Connect, plus whatever other earnings he had from his drug empire, and was planning on using this vast wealth to fund his new life as a businessman. So, quick recap of Marlo's current standing. He has no real crew or muscle to speak of, no Greek connection any longer, but does have an insane amount of wealth. As I stated earlier, we'll be looking at these next 3 possibilities through the context of Marlo trying to regain his crown. So with that in mind, let's look at the first road. Could Marlo possibly, despite all these disadvantages, actually regain his crown? I believe Marlo has 2 possible paths to regaining the crown. One, he would have to convince the Greeks that with him back in the game, he should once again be their point of contact over Fat-Faced Rick and Slim Charles. This would theoretically give him the leverage he would need to take over his seat at the head of the co-op, as they would once again be reliant on him for the Greek connection and that good dope. So they don't have to go back to selling that stepped-on New York shit.
That stepped on New York shit.
And the Greeks clearly had some respect for Marlo, enough that they were willing to step to the side and allow him to take out Prop Joe after the shipment is stolen by Omar. They also don't have any history with Rick and Slim, and although their history with Marlo is brief, it is a history nonetheless. Could Marlo have convinced the Greeks to rekindle their business relationship with him over Rick and Slim? I don't believe so, for a number of reasons. First, the Greeks love quiet. They are solely concerned with making money, and they don't like any moves that rock the boat and draw attention. They would have to assume that Rick and Slim are not going to be so keen to give up their newly attained leadership roles, and the backing of Marlo may ultimately lead to another gang war, like in Season 3. While the Greeks aren't featured heavily in that season, the co-op consistently expresses frustration with Stringer for not reining Avon in, as the gang war is preventing them from making money to the point they kick Stringer and the Barksdales out of the co-op altogether. Any drop in revenue by the co-op is no doubt also felt by the Greeks. This is surely not something they would want to repeat, and as Vandas himself says,
"The street doesn't concern us."
Another important factor here is how well connected the Greeks are with law enforcement. It's revealed in Season 2 that they even have an FBI agent providing them information. They would have little trouble learning the details of Marlo's most recent arrest, which means they would know how weakened his crew, and more specifically his muscle, is due to the recent arrests and deaths. With a little digging, it probably wouldn't be hard for them to see how weak Marlo's current position is. And it's also not out of the realm of possibility that they may be well connected enough with law enforcement to know that Marlo's case isn't totally wiped away, but rather just placed on the shelf, as Perlman tells Levy. They'd be uncomfortable backing someone with such a large potential drug indictment hanging over his head. Not to mention the fact that Marlo was arrested in the first place, and after handling only one measly shipment as head of the co-op. Not exactly inspiring enough to convince the Greeks to return to their relationship with Marlo. For all these reasons, I don't think Marlo can rely on the Greeks to regain the crown. This leaves his only path to the crown the exact reverse of this. Rather than reconnecting with the Greeks to regain leverage over the co-op, he must regain his seat at the head of the co-op first, and use that to present himself as the only option to the Greeks. Unfortunately for Marlo, there was never any love lost between himself and the other co-op members. It was always just a relationship of convenience, Marlo's muscle for the co-op's product, and many of the co-op members express outright disdain for Marlo. He also didn't do himself any previous favors here. He consistently mocks and ridicules the other members in co-op meetings, he immediately raises the price of the bricks upon taking the crown from Joe, and he even discontinues co-op meetings altogether. So he would never be able to win the co-op back out of respect for himself or his business skills. He would have to take the co-op back the same way he did the first time, through the gun. As mentioned before, Marlo's muscle and organization is gone outside of O-Dog, who is still just a young up-and-coming hitter. So this seems like a lofty, if not impossible, proposition. Outside of the murder of Avon, the young girl the Barksdales used to try and lure Marlo out of hiding in Season 3, we don't see Marlo put any work in himself, but he's no doubt capable. The police are aware of Marlo before the events of Season 3 due to a witness Marlo offed, and anyone who can win the respect and unwavering loyalty of cold-hearted killers like Chris and Snoop is surely no punk.
You call me a punk?
So Marlo must have some talent with the steel. Would that be enough? I don't think so, for two main reasons. First, the co-op's eyes are wide open with regards to Marlo after the murder of Joe. His explanation that Omar is responsible fools nobody. So he won't even have the element of surprise. They all know what he is and what he's about, and would no doubt relish the opportunity to take him out once and for all. Second, one of the men at the head of the co-op now is probably best suited to take on Marlo, Slim Charles. Throughout his time on the show, Slim proves himself as a man clearly more than capable in the violent aspects of the drug game, and it's even Slim himself in Season 3 who gets the drop on Marlo and is ready to take him out, before the police intercede. Slim has a strong strategic mind, seeing the threat of Marlo and trying to warn Stringer well before Avon gets back and comes to the same conclusion. One avenue for Marlo would be to use his immense resources to hire muscle, as we see other gangsters do throughout the show, notably the Barksdales with Brother Mouzone in Season 2, and Avon with some Eastside hitters in Season 3. However, I believe Marlo would run into issues here as well. First, It's made clear by the show that Avon's ability to hire someone as skilled as Mouzone was not just simple dollars and cents, but also Avon's reputation in New York. This is a reputation Marlo does not share. In fact, we never get a sense that Marlo's well known anywhere outside of Baltimore. Second, we see in Season 3 when Avon is trying to hire gunmen for his new war with Marlo that it is not as simple as it seems.
Black Donnie say he ain't having any of it. Say Brother Mouzone put a hex on all of us.
What about Peacock?
Peacock went and hired out with some Dominicans.
What about Eggy Mule?
And Eggy locked up, caught a nickel with the feds for a pistol.
What about Shorty Boy?
Shorty Boy went and cleaned his old act up. Yeah, I know. Fucked us all up.
Good hitters are extremely hard to come by, and so Marlo's money appears to be useless here. Given all these factors, I find it unlikely Marlo would succeed in retaking the crown, which leaves us with the two possible outcomes for Marlo that are the only two realistic options.
Prison and graveyards full of boys who want a crown.
Marlo ending up in prison or the grave would not only be the logical outcome for his character, but it would also serve the artistic purpose as well. It would be a full circle moment for his character, who is so hyper-focused on the crown and the game above all else that he knowingly sprints headfirst towards either of these two conclusions, so long as the crown sits on his head for a period of time. He represents the darkest aspects of the game, so a dark end is no doubt in store. But which dark end? Let's start with the possibility that Marlo ends up in prison. On the surface, this seems like a surefire winner, right? After all, he was just the subject of a major drug operation by the Baltimore PD. They have a case just sitting there waiting to be prosecuted at a time of their choosing. He is warned that if he doesn't stay retired, that's exactly what's going to happen. So this is the clear outcome, right? Marlo comes out of retirement, and law enforcement makes good on their threat to put him behind bars as a result. Well, no, not exactly. It's a bit more complicated. For starters, the threat by Perlman does come with a timeline. Marlo would actually have to last in the game long enough for the case to come back into play. And even if he did, the reasons why enforcement didn't come down on Marlo the first time around would still exist. Granted, Carcetti is shown in the governor's office in the show's ending montage, but I believe this is a bigger jump forward than when we see Marlo on the corner. At the time Marlo is on the corner, Carcetti is still actively campaigning for governor, and therefore would be incentivized to keep Marlo's case quiet. Not to mention, even if Carcetti is in the governor's office when Marlo is still in the game, Nerese Campbell takes over as mayor, and she's as corrupt as they come, still pushing the same old law enforcement game of juking the stats. She no doubt would want it to stay quiet as well, as she was in City Hall at the time that the Marlo arrest occurs, and wouldn't want the dirt attached to that case to come to the surface any more than Carcetti would, to risk any guilt by association. She's someone who's well attuned to the political game. Also, at this point, the law enforcement players directly related to the Marlo case, who would even know about Perlman's threat to Levy, are gone. Perlman is no longer prosecuting cases, she's a judge now. And McNulty and Lester are out of the department entirely due to the shenanigans they pulled to make the Marlo case happen. Even Daniels is gone, now an attorney, no longer involved with the BPD at all. So it's not hard to envision Marlo's case just staying on the shelf. I suppose Marlo could get picked up for something new altogether, unrelated to his first case, but Levy is a skilled enough attorney to still use the dirt associated with the first case to his advantage should that happen. And frankly, I think it's a moot point. Marlo can't really get deep enough back in the game to even get arrested on something else without pulling off what we mentioned earlier, winning over the Greeks or bringing the co-op to heel. And I think as soon as he tries, he meets his fate. The fate he was probably always destined for, and the only one that makes sense given the final state of his position in the show relative to the other characters. Death. Yes, I believe an early grave is the only possible outcome for Marlo, the very second he made the decision to leave the legitimate world and return to the street corners he knows so well. As already mentioned, he simply doesn't have the muscle to reclaim the crown this time, and given how poorly he treated the other players in the game, there will be no shortage of them who are more than happy to take him out for good, starting with the man at the top who almost did it the first time around, Slim Charles. After all, Slim took out Cheese because of his involvement with Prop Joe's murder. There's no way he wouldn't love taking out Marlo, who's the man who actually gave the order. The minute word gets out that Marlo is back in the game, the co-op would make taking him out priority one. They put up with Marlo when they couldn't match his muscle, but now that they can, they have no use of him. They would never risk bringing him back into the fold, as the other members were much more focused on business and avoiding law enforcement than they were in wearing the crown for the crown's sake. And Marlo, while certainly possessing a keen understanding of the streets and a strong strategic mind, he was still always reliant on a lot of third-party assists that we've touched on in this video. And his strategic thinking always came back in the end to the same game plan: murder and intimidate your way to the top. Without the muscle to pull that off, and without the same luck he had previously in the show, Marlo's attempt to retake the crown should be fairly brief. And one of the coldest, most ruthless villains in TV history meets a fitting ending, albeit one that happened off screen. Personally, I love that the show did not show any of this on screen. The Wire always felt like a show that gave its viewers a lot of credit for their ability to work things out themselves, and to pick up on clues and connections that the show leaves throughout its story, rather than spoon-feeding you everything. I think Marlo's ending is another example of that. But what do you all think? Does Marlo end up in the grave, or is it another one of the possible outcomes discussed here? Or something else I've missed entirely? Sound off in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've just started this channel, as this is only my second video, my first being a theory I have on the show Succession. I've included a link to that in the description. Please give this video a like and please subscribe to my channel, as I plan to release more videos like this one. I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for watching.